Be it known they're my opinions and they're not necessarily shared by any of the other selectmen. These presentations will also show up in written form in the Enterprise, and they will be posted on sandwichschoolnews.com with appropriate links to the data behind them. The first topic is the tax rate. And the first thing we want to understand is, where does the tax rate come from? It's really quite simple. It's the total tax levy, property tax levy, divided by the value of all the property that's taxable in the town of Sandwich. In this particular tax year, the levy is $46.8 million, and the tax base, the total of all the taxable property, is $3.67 billion. You divide one by the other, multiply by 1,000, and you get the tax rate, which is $12.74. Now, there's no way of getting around the fact that that is the highest tax rate of the 15 Cape towns, and I'm also going to include Wareham and Plymouth in some of the data later on. So with a number like that, there's only two ways to make the tax rate smaller. You either have to make the bottom number bigger, increase the tax base, or you have to make the top number smaller, decrease the amount of dollars you collect in the tax levy. So first, let's look at how much bigger would we have to make the tax base to accomplish a relatively modest reduction in the tax rate to say $1 to $11.74. Well, here's the formula. You cross out the 3.67 billion and make it 3.99 billion. And that means adding $332 million to the total value of all the taxable property in the town of Sandwich. And you achieve the $11.74. To put that in a little bit of perspective, the shovel is already in the ground on Forestdale Village, the development just past the mobile station out along Route 130. When that becomes reality, it will add about $50 million to the tax base. There's also an ambitious project on the books for South Sandwich Village Center. And when that comes to fruition, that will add $120 million to the tax base. The two together will add $170 million, and that's just enough to drop the tax rate by 50 cents. Now, I don't mean to minimize that 50 cents. That's very important. Economic development is essential to the future of the town of Sandwich. That 50 cents means, for me, the average taxpayer, a little over $150 decrease in my tax bill. So, and also, economic development brings jobs. It brings retail. It means no trips to Wareham or to Plymouth or to Hyannis or to Falmouth to buy some of the things we can't currently purchase in Sandwich. So don't lose sight of the fact that economic development is important, but it's not going to solve the tax rate problem. Now let's flip it over and look at the other side of the equation. How much do we have to decrease the tax levy to achieve that same $1 reduction in the tax rate? Again, cross out the 46.8, do the arithmetic, and it comes down to $43.1 million. That is a decrease of $3.7 million. Now, the average employee on the payroll of the town of Sandwich, with salary, benefits, and everything all rolled together, costs about $80,000. So you divide the 3.7 million by $80,000, and that's 46 employees. 46 employees. That, if you took them in proportion from the schools and the general government, that would be 31 from the schools and 15 from general government. Again, in proportions, that would mean 19 teachers, 12 support personnel in the school system, 4 firefighters, 3 police officers, 2 each from the library and the public works, etc., etc. Efficiency in the dictionary is defined as the useful input you get out of a system divided by the input that you had to put in to get that output. One of the most common efficiency measures that all people seem to understand is if you drive an automobile, the useful output is miles of travel, the useful input is gallons of fuel. Divide the miles by the fuel consumption, you get miles per gallon. So efficiency is something that's measured routinely. But is there a simple metric to measure the efficiency of local government? First you have to say, well, what's the output you're trying to achieve? And the output is municipal services, all of them, including education. And the input is tax dollars, the total budget of the town of Sandwich, for example. Now, to be useful for comparative purposes anyway, a metric has to be based on a self-consistent set of data. It has to be something relatively simple, like miles per gallon. I spent quite a bit of time searching around to try and find something that would serve as a metric for local government efficiency. Eventually it came down to probably the simplest one, which is the number of dollars spent on local government divided by the population that you're trying to serve. For Sandwich, the budget is about $68 million. The population is about 21,000 people. So Sandwich spends $3,238 per citizen on local government. Now, for comparison purposes, I chose the 15 towns on the Cape. I also included Wareham and Plymouth because, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is those are the places you might drive if you wanted to purchase something that you couldn't find in Sandwich, or those are places where people could live alternatively to Sandwich and still commute to wherever they work. So if you look at those 17 towns, 15 on the Cape plus Wareham and Plymouth, where does Sandwich stand? Here again the chart shows Sandwich at $32.38. Wareham spends the least at $2,800 per citizen. That's the only town of those 17 that spends less than Sandwich. Yarmouth and Bourne, two towns with similar populations to Sandwich, spend about $3,300 per citizen on local government. Now, it can't be strictly population related, and it doesn't correlate if you look at all the numbers. The number table is available through sandwichschoolnews.com. But if you look at Mashpee with 14,000 people, or Falmouth with 21 or 31,000 people, so Mashpee's 2/3 of Sandwich, Falmouth about 1.5 times Sandwich. Both of them come in at $3,800 as shown on the chart. And topping the list is Provincetown at 10,000. So again, there are the numbers. If you're curious enough, you can go and look at the entire data table. The source of the data is the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. They have an at-a-glance report that is specifically there to compare towns. Now, the school budget makes up about 2/3 of the expenditures for the town of Sandwich. If you saw part 2, dealing with the potential use of expenditures per citizen as an efficiency metric. For the town of Sandwich, our most expensive and arguably most valuable citizens are our school children. And we spend a significant amount of our budget doing as we should, educating them, and educating them quite well, according to a couple of national magazines. I have had many people approach me and start discussions with some version of the school budget is out of control. Well, let's see what the numbers say. The graphic is the school budget. The vertical scale is in tens of millions of dollars, 10, 20, $30 million. The horizontal scale is years, the last 4 fiscal years, and the projected budget for the next fiscal year, FY 2013. The blue portion at the bottom of the bars in the bar graph is the part of the school budget that comes directly out of your pocket and mine. It's the local contribution to the school budget. In FY09, it was $23.2 million. For the 3 years in between, it's varied up and down a bit, always sort of around $23 million and some change. Big change, of course, when you're talking, that decimal point is hundreds of thousands of dollars. The projected local contribution to the school budget for FY13 is $23.25 million. That's up $50,000 on a base of $23 million over the course of 5 years. You can translate that into a percentage. I think it's something like 0.2%. The yellow portion of the bars is the Chapter 70 contribution, which doesn't come directly out of your pocket and mine. It comes indirectly out of your pocket and mine by way of the State House. In FY09, about $6.9 million was contributed through Chapter 70. The number held at $6.9 million in FY 2010 and dropped a little bit to 6.8 in FY11. And then in FY12, the state was on hard times and they cut it down to 6.4, where it stayed for FY13. Now the little red bit up at the top of the last two columns is how the school system compensated for the decrease in Chapter 70 funding without increasing local contribution. In FY11, the federal government enacted the Jobs Act. It was intended to save the jobs of teachers and firefighters and police officers. We were okay, Sandwich was okay in FY11, so the school system didn't spend that money in FY11 and they were allowed to carry it over into FY12. And it was that $435,000, I think was the actual number, that is represented by that little red speck up at the top of the column there. Now, the jobs grant money was gone at the end of FY12. So how did the school system compensate for the decrease in Chapter 70 funding? So school choice funds was one part of that little red block at the top there. Some bus fees and additional athletic fees were proposed as another potential way to compensate for the drop in Chapter 70 funding. And there was a supplemental budget submitted which added another $130,000. So the red block again has been compensated for by dipping into school choice funds, by the fact that the state actually upped the Chapter 70 by $130,000, and the proposal, and I'm not sure how the school committee is going to proceed with this, to add some additional fees. That's what the numbers say. The school budget has essentially been flat for 5 years. Now, we all know that the decline in enrollment has been a fact over those 5 years. Some federal inflation indices will tell you inflation has gone down. Draw your own conclusion based on what you know about enrollment and what you know about inflation, and ask yourself whether a flat school budget over 5 years is rational or not. That's it. That is the numbers as far as the school budget is concerned. And there is one other thing. If you look down at the bottom of the chart, there's an efficiency measure for school systems as well. It's just how many dollars do you spend per student educated? And for Sandwich, that number is $11,333, or at least I think that was the 2009-10 number. The data table behind these presentations has that number for all the rest of the 17 towns. Again, those 17 being 15 Cape Towns, Plymouth, and Wareham. And Sandwich spends the least per student. You can make your own subjective judgment as to the quality of education in Sandwich, but a couple of national magazines have said we are top notch in that department. And we spend less than any of those other, or any of the total of 17 towns in the data package behind this particular presentation. Capital and debt management. This is an area where Sandwich has, of necessity, painted itself into a bit of a corner. As the town was growing rapidly, virtually any dollars available for recapitalizing or increasing the capital assets of the town had to go into the school system. We built several additions on the wing school, built a new high school, built 2 new K-8 schools, added a wing on the high school. That sucked up a great many of the capital dollars, virtually all of them. Now, the graphic that'll come up now is just a list. It's a list of big ticket capital items that we could choose to address over the next 5 or 10 years. I try to think about it in terms of what will the community look like on its 400th birthday, which is 27 years from now in 2039. It's unlikely that I'm going to be around to see that. I'd have to be 96 years old. It's possible, but I'm not going to count on it. There's plenty of room for diversity of opinion as to whether the things on this list are wants or needs. I think they're definitely needs, or I wouldn't have included them on the list. And the list may not be complete. There may be things that should be on there that I didn't think to put on there, or there may be things that I put on there that other people believe don't deserve to be on there. So this should all be a subject for debate within the community over the next year, maybe 2, so that we can decide which of these are actually needs and which ones are wants. And then there's always room for diversity of opinion of how much we want to put into each of those. There's a line that you can pass on anything where you've treaded into the want area instead of just satisfying exactly what you need. Now, I'll just read down the list. They're not in any particular priority. In fact, what I did was I wrote them on the backs of cards and flipped them upside down on the table and just listed them in the order that I turned them over. First one, public safety facilities. Second one, the senior center, dealing with the erosion of our beaches, particularly at Town Neck, but as the west end of Spring Hill Beach is also in trouble in that area. Water resource management. We all read in the paper about the pressure that we're under to deal with nitrogen that we're passing down into our estuaries. Road and infrastructure deterioration, school facilities. School enrollment is declining. The school committee has recognized that, and they're examining whether the wing school should remain a school long term. If it doesn't, well, what are we going to do with that facility? Expanded library. The library is crowded. A lot of people use it. And how do we appropriately expand the library to meet the needs of the citizens of the town? And we have our town offices scattered all over to the 4 winds, and it would be in the best interest of the town, in my view anyway, to consolidate those municipal offices in some central location. Now, the Selectmen's Long-Range Plan, which is published as 5 pages in the town meeting warrant last May. It's up online if somebody wants to go to townofsandwich.net, and there's a highlighted link that'll take you right to the Selectmen's Long-Range Plan. One of the line items in that long-range plan is that we should come up with a capital, long-range, 10-year, 5-year capital plan for the town. Capital plans don't do any good if they sit on the shelf in Bud Dunham's office. We have to come up with this plan. We have to do it in public meetings. We have to cultivate understanding of within the taxpayers and the voters as to what we contemplate doing, what order we contemplate doing them in, and what it's going to cost us to pay for all of this. How do we pay for it all? In presentation number 4, I listed 9 big ticket capital items that I think we should be planning to deal with in the near future, the next 5 years. Let's say 5 years, just for an arbitrary figure. What do we want Sandwich to look like on its 400th birthday? It's not too early to think about that, and maybe do a little planning for 2039. Just as a measuring stick, anybody who takes out a 30-year mortgage today is still going to be paying in 2042. So planning 30 years out is not a foreign subject to anyone who holds a mortgage, for example. If we're going to pay for dealing with those 9 things, maybe somebody will think of a 10th, maybe somebody will knock one off of my list of 9. There's going to be some big scary numbers involved. And so where are we going to get the money without dipping even more precipitously into the pockets of the taxpayers? And this graphic, titled Paying for It, shows several ways that we can address that issue. Now, the first one, and again, this points up the absolute essential nature of expanding our commercial tax base. Tax base growth is one of the keys to being able to pay for some of the things that I believe the community needs in the future. I mentioned in, I think it was in the first presentation, that there's already a shovel in the ground for Forestdale Village that will add about $50 million to the tax base. $50 million added to the tax base is $600,000, $700,000 added to tax revenue. The plan that's on the drawing board, and the developer has already gone to the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency for approval, and has got the proposal before the Cape Cod Commission. That will add another $120 million, and that's another about $1.5 million to added revenue. We have the industrial park, and in the Selectmen's long-range plan, there are plans by the SEIC to submit a grant to build a road, an additional road in the industrial park. Now, presumably that's not going to be a road to nowhere, so that we could probably count on, let's just pull a number out of the air, another $1 million in tax revenue from there. I read in the paper not too long ago that there's plans in the works for redeveloping the Musaski property, the Sandwich Office Center on Tupper Road. There's room for some more. We've come to call it the Marina District, but it's really the area along Tupper Road and into Merchant Square. There's some potential for redevelopment. Maybe there's another $600,000–700,000 in tax revenue there. So I think it was Everett Dirksen said, it's $1 million here, $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking some real money. The first line on this graphic says that there's $3 to $4 million per year, not one time, but per year, possible from redevelopment or development of existing properties in the town of Sandwich. Another way to finance some of the goals that we might set for ourselves would be through cost avoidance. We've dipped into that a little bit with the pay-as-you-throw system, which was put into place recently. We're going to get a report from the Department of Public Works on just how well that is paying off, but I wouldn't be surprised to see us avoiding $250,000–300,000 a year in costs with that system in place. Green energy, we've taken a little step in that direction also by signing that power purchase agreement with the Howland Development folks over towards Snake Pond, $150,000 a year there. So again, these are per year. This is stuff that happens on and on. Now there's probably some other green energy things we'll be able to do. I just read in the paper this morning This morning I'm recording this on July 17th. So in this morning's paper there was an article that said that the state legislature has got a bill, two bills, one from the House, one from the Senate, in conference now that will double the amount of green energy that utilities have to buy. So Sandwich's current 10 megawatts could become 20 megawatts. So there's some possibilities there. Now the next line says revenue enhancement, and in big red letters it says tax. You have to use the word tax. This is tax. Revenue enhancement is just a fancy way of saying tax. We tried out the meal tax on you folks being the voters. And you didn't like that one. It's unfortunate in my estimation because we could have used that to pay for the infrastructure and road deterioration that above and beyond what Chapter 90, the state aid, covers for us. The next one is sale of town assets. The newspaper has multiple times dealt with our holdings in South Sandwich Village Center. We have 55 acres of land there. I don't know whether that land is $100,000 an acre or $200,000 an acre. That would put it somewhere between $5.5 and $11 million. If we can find a suitable buyer and extract that value, that could go toward paying for some of the things that we'd like to do. If we happen to go through with the public safety building that's been proposed, we'll have 3 surplus fire stations and a surplus police station. If we consolidated our municipal buildings, then we'd have Jan Sebastian, the town hall annex, and other bits and pieces scattered around town that we might sell off. Maybe $8–10 million. It's only one time, this though. This is not a per year thing, and there are laws that says that we can only use that money to offset debt. So we would be using it in that way. Now, things with big question marks after them, developer mitigation. How do we want, developers, when they come in, they offer to support the community that they're entering. How much would we get? I don't know. Would we rather it come in terms of infrastructure, roads and sewer lines, for example? Or would we want it to be in terms of turnkey buildings, senior centers, libraries, what have you? Or a contribution to the public safety building? Those are all, you see the question marks there? They're all open questions that we have to think about in terms of planning for our long-term capital future. And the last one on the list here, and maybe somebody will want to add some to this list too, I don't know. We need to think about whether we want to repurpose the wing complex, assuming that the school committee, and it's a school committee decision, this Board of Selectmen can't push this one. The school committee decides that in 4 or 5 years, and please be clear on this, it's not going to happen tomorrow, so there's no reason to panic. There's no way it could happen tomorrow. But the enrollment trends say that by the 2016-17 school year, maybe 2017-2018 school year, we won't need the wing building as a school. Now, is it more cost effective to repurpose that facility to be maybe a senior center or municipal offices or some kind of a recreation center? It may prove to be more cost effective to run a bulldozer over it. I certainly hope not, but it seems to me that there should be a way for us to factor in repurposing the wing complex to meet some of the other needs in that list of 9 that I identified. I don't think there's much more that needs saying at this particular point. In the Selectmen's long-range plan, and that long-range plan is available as a link, a highlighted link off of townofsandwich.net. Item 2F says that we need I think it says a 10-year capital plan. I don't care if you call it a 5-year capital plan, a 10-year capital plan, 7 years, 6 months, whatever. But we need a plan. And this is definitely Jim Pierce's opinion. We need a plan. The plan has to be written down. It can't be more than 10, 12 pages, a few graphs, and it has to be shared with the voters. The voters have to know where this particular Board of Selectmen, and hopefully successive boards of selectmen, would like to take this town. The selectmen don't get to make the decisions. We propose decisions. We put questions on the warrant. We put questions on the ballot. The voters answer the questions. But the first step, again, in my opinion, is to get that plan down on paper and do everything we can to get it out to the voters and get it to the point where we all have a common understanding of where we're trying to go and how we're going to get there.